I'm Julie Herman of Jaybird Quilt, and welcome back to the Telescope Sew Along. Now that we have gone ahead and done our fussy cutting of our shapes to create all of our pieced kites and some of our kites from rotary cut strips, it's time to go ahead and begin to put these into blocks. We are simply going to start with any two pieces. One quick note is if you are very particular about the placement of things in your quilt, you might want to skip ahead. Right now we're on page 10. You might want to skip ahead to page 14 and 15 and plan your entire layout before sewing your blocks together. It takes a lot more space to do it in this method, but if you're very particular about the placement of your blocks, you might want to consider doing that. I'm just going to go ahead with page 10 and begin to put my blocks together. So I'm going to start with these two, and I'm simply going to put them right sides together, and they are the exact same size of each other. So with the same scant 1/4 inch that we used to sew our kites together in the first place, we're going to sew these two together. And this is what it'll look like, 2 units sewn together. So now I am simply going to take the third, and I'm going to place that right sides together onto this, and I'm going to line up down here, and then this should line up with everything so that this space here from this valley that is created by these two to here is a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to sew from that valley all the way down. And this is where our snips come in handy so that we can cut our pieces as we go. Chain piecing helps to eliminate excess thread use. I'm simply going to press this one open, and this is where your seam roller can come in handy. Just to kind of roll that nice and flat. You can press with your iron at each point. I find it works well enough to press with my seam roller to add my third piece, and then I go ahead and press when I have 3 of them together. So I'm simply going to take another one, place it up here, again, right sides together, and sew from that valley all the way down. And if you have too much bumps going on, this is a nice time to use a stiletto as well. Let's see how this looks. And that turned out great. So I will finger press this seam open, but now I will take this piece over to the iron to give it a good press. One quick note, we want to make sure that we are pressing and not ironing. Pressing is just up and down with our iron. Ironing is pushing. We don't want to push. We do have bias in many places, especially because of all the fussy cutting we did, so we don't want to stretch that. Some of your blocks you are going to leave like this. The numbers for how many you need to do are in step 4 on page 10. Most of them, though, will be sewn into complete blocks. So that's where we are at now, as I have 2 half blocks. I picked the same fabrics that are shown on page 11 for today's example, so that it'll hopefully be as easy as possible for you to follow along. What I'm about to show you is shown in step-by-step photos on page 11 as well. So this is what I call the hang pin, and it's the technique that I use to make sure that this point and this point perfectly line up, which will make all 6 of our points perfectly match in the middle. So we're going to put these two together the way that we want them to be, right sides together, and then we're just going to stick our finger in to create a little gap. And you're going to take a pin. This is when I highly recommend the glass head super fine pins. If your pin has a thick shaft, it can distort things, so a really nice fine shaft makes things work well. So as you can see, I stuck that right through. I'm just going to wiggle it so you can see right through where that point is. And then I'm going to find where these points come together, which is right here. And I'm going to poke through. And then I'm going to push these two together. And I'm going to let that pin hang there, hence the name hang pin. And what I want to make sure is that that pin is perpendicular to this fabric. If it is angled like this or like this, it's going to distort and things aren't going to line up perfectly when I go to sew this seam. So with it hanging there, I'm going to take 2 additional pins, and I'm going to put 1 on either side. And now I can remove my hang pin, because as you can imagine, when I get to sewing, it would definitely shift and move. I can't sew with that because of my throat plate and how my machine is set up. So I'm going to pull the hang pin out, set that one aside. And now I could sew the length of the seam, but what if I made a mistake? What if things shifted? That's a lot of using my seam ripper. So I'm simply going to start about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch above the point. Sew, and sew the same distance below, about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to remove it and check. This might seem like it takes a bunch of extra time, and it does take some additional time. But I have found that the time that it takes to do this is much less than the time it takes to account for potential mistakes and unpicking those seams. So nice and slow. Never want to sew over your pin, so you take your pin out. And we're going to take this off and see how it looks. And there we go. That is pretty darn perfect in my eyes. It's going to be hard pressed to get any better than that. So what I do now is I leave that thread in. I call it thread pinning. And I simply line up the top of my block and the bottom of my block and sew the full length of my seam to finish a hexagon. I'm just going to slowly stitch right back on top of the original thread. No need to remove it. Use my stiletto to help keep things lined up. And there we are. The hang pin really helps you get perfect points almost every time. And I'll show you that one more time. So again, take our 2 pieces, right sides together. Take our pin and insert it right where the points all meet up. Check on the other side. Yep. Looks like I didn't put it in exactly the right place. That's why we check. All right, I'm good that time. Then go ahead and insert it where all the points meet up on your other piece. And let it hang there. Once you've got it lined up with a nice 90, put 1 pin on either side. And as you can see here, my purple stripe is extending a little bit above. And sometimes things like that happen. It accounts for seam allowances, anything being off. And by using the hang pin instead of just trusting the edge of our fabric, we are going to have more success getting our points to match up perfectly. Okay. Take the hang pin out. And again, we're just going to start right before the point. And there we go. And this one is good. It's not as perfect as the other one. It looks like I could have gotten a little bit closer, but I'm happy enough with that. But if you weren't, it's just a small distance to unpick to fix your block. But since I'm happy with it, I'm going to go ahead and sew the length of the seam. I'll be back here in a couple days to go over how I put the blocks on my design wall and talk a little bit about quilting. If you have not yet signed up for the sew along emails, you can do so in the caption below. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos in the sew along. See you soon!